had stomach cancer and was given 3 months to live. Having found out about the possibilities of assisted suicide in Australia, he decided to take a trip to the Northern Territory where the doctor who was talking about this on the media resided. His trip took him through interesting adventures through the outback of Australia in which he learned of the meaning of his life. That is, what was important to him. Rex eventually returned home to the love of his life, whom he had never married. Polly was an Aboriginal woman who lived across the street from Rex, and she moved into his home while he went on this journey. They spoke on the phone, and they spoke of their love for one another and how they had never spoken these words before because racism was rampant in their town. Rex returned to his home, which he had left to Polly in his will, only to find her there waiting for him on the porch where they would sit together. She greeted him enthusiastically and helped him to sit on that same porch. And as they sat together holding hands, Rex nestling his head on Polly's shoulder, he said his final words in the movie: "No more pain." This film was adapted from the play Last Cab to Darwin, and it uses the metaphor of journey to find our way home. It is this theme that some theologians state is the meaning of life. We are all on a journey to find our way home. Sounds so simple. And yet, there is suffering all around us. You can't turn on the news channel or read a newspaper or go onto social media sites without seeing that there definitely is much suffering in this world. This suffering, it's thought, may stem from what is called spiritual death. Now, what is that? One could say that Rex exemplified spiritual death as he contemplated leaving his friends and beloved to commit suicide. Polly told him she would take care of him, and his friends reassured him that they would be there for him too. But it took Rex leaving this kind of love to realize that he would be happiest right back home. Now, for monotheistic religions, spiritual death means a person is not connected to what? God or Creator, thus calling for more prayer, theological reading and reflection, and being with others within the religious community. And in some Eastern religions, spiritual death could mean letting go of disillusions about the self, thus facilitating an awakening about one's true nature, one's true self. And of course, it's thought that if we become more connected to the divine or the divine within, suffering will disappear, and so will spiritual death. We'll feel more alive. No more pain. Now this week, we have 2 holidays coming up that are centered on the concept of atonement. Do you all know what those are? I will tell you. We got one over there,
Yom
Yom Kippur in Judaism. And what's the second one?
Rosh Hashanah.
That's later. What's the second one? Ashura in Islam. Both holidays will most likely focus on fasting as a way of getting closer to the divine in order to atone for one's what? Sins. Both may use the idea of forgiveness, asking for forgiveness as a tool for atonement. Now, our Time for All Ages story told us that Lot's wife was looking back, right, at Sodom against God's commands, and she turned into a pillar of salt. This appears to represent what can happen if we don't atone for our past transgressions. Of course, we rewrote the story, right? But if we look at the story as written, perhaps we too can become like stone with a hardened heart that then rejects the love that others offer us at our most vulnerable times. So Rex became like Lot's wife when he decided to journey toward assisted suicide, hardening his heart against the love that his beloved and his friends were trying to give him at his most vulnerable time. But then he turned to find love along this journey and then returned to his beloved. A metaphor perhaps for our own journeys to return to that which is divine for us in our own lives. But the Lot's wife story is not necessarily presented in that light. It's taught to children and adults all across the land as a definite warning to obey God's laws or suffer the consequences. Of course, I wonder, well, what could be the most important of God's laws? What do you think it is? That golden rule up there that we find in most religions. Do unto others. But what about do unto others as you would have others do unto you, right? What about what you're doing to yourself? Being kind to yourself. What about forgiveness? Forgiveness of yourself. Maybe that's why I like the reading that we had, the poem by Lynn Unger. She challenges us to see Lot's wife as on a journey, leaving her home, the only land she ever knew, and having to trust in a deity who saves her family, but then destroys her friends in the hometown. The imagery of her spinning around through salt, crystal, tears is so powerful. Stars glaring at her, not welcoming her home, but representing judgment as she searches for all that will make her feel whole and loved again. Even as she's confused by what she must do, confused by what she witnesses, the suffering of others, her own suffering reflected in the mirror of the stars. These mountains cannot receive you, and still a current of air keeps singing home, as if that meant something you could go to, as if something could finally stand still. When you were a kid, I venture to think. You may have spun around and around and around so fast that you felt dizzy and lost when you tried to stand still. How many have done that? How many do it today? Am I the only one? You're with me. All right, good. Imagine, though, if we're looking at the suffering of others, what it must feel like for the person struggling to make ends meet. Or the person who just experienced death of a loved one, or loss of a job, or a child who's gone off to college or the military. Home. What could that possibly mean in those instances? Have you ever been in such a state? You just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep spinning, because if you stop, you fear that you won't find home. Home is not found in the past. Home may not be in the future. Home may not even be in the present. And so you keep spinning. This is spiritual death. And our nation is filled with it all around us, as we heard during our sorrows, in which it was lifted up that somebody was accosted in this town just for being of a different ethnicity, a different religion. When I hear stories like that, my heart aches. It aches at what I see and hear and feel. Sometimes I feel like I feel all of the pain and suffering in our world. And sometimes I think, will we ever see springtime again? But it's at those times when we must work hard to stop spinning. Just stop. Stop. And breathe. And search for that which brings us joy. Search for the love. Busca el amor. There's a teaching story in which a Hasidic rabbi asks his followers, "Where does God exist?" Surprised by such a question, they reply that surely God is everywhere. Wrong, says the rabbi. God exists only where humans let God in. Where do you let the divine presence in your life? Where do you let light in when you sit in the darkness? Sometimes we need to let the light in by letting go, to awaken ourselves from such spiritual death. How do we do such a thing when we are so bent on being the best or always right? Forgiveness, perhaps? Forgiving ourselves for thinking we are always right when we know we're not. Forgiving ourselves for not being the best. Forgiving ourselves for not doing enough. Forgiving ourselves. That's the first step to letting go of what you need to let go. then what do we do next? We turn and ask for forgiveness from others. There is so much power in saying, I'm sorry that I said those words to you. I'm sorry I did not respond kindly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that I loved you when I had the chance. There's a verse in the Quran that says, truly in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest. Do you remember what love feels like? Can you let go of all that you did or did not do in your life and truly begin to love yourself so you can love the world? Because what the world needs more of is love. Let go. Let love in. No more spinning. No more pain.
I am stretched on your grave and I'll lie here forever. If your hands were in mine, I'd be sure they would not sever. My apple tree, my brightness, it's time we were together. For I smell of the earth and I'm warmed by the weather. Do you, when my family thinks that I'm safely in my bed, oh, from morning till night, I'm stretched at your head, calling out to the earth with tears hot and wild for the loss of the girl that I loved as a child. Oh, the praise and the cries, oh, it watch me in dread. Oh, for I still love you, oh my love, but you're dead. Oh, I still will be your shelter through the storm and through the storm. But with you